everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Brought to the Table. My name is Luke Jones, and today we are going to be doing something very special on this show, as requested by way too many of you based off of a particular live stream I did a few weeks ago. We are going to be covering one of my absolute favorite games of all time, and I am not exaggerating this. We are going to be talking about Monopoly. Monopoly is one of my absolute favorite games of all time. It is actually the first tabletop game that I have actually ever taken seriously or played. And I have a lot of feelings about this. I know a lot of people have a lot of different feelings about Monopoly. And I want to sit here and tell you why I enjoy it. I know Monopoly has been revised over the years. It has different editions now, made to be a little bit more user-friendly. People have all sorts of opinions on it. But Monopoly is incredibly special for me personally. So what we're going to do is I'm going to dive into, basically kind of my setup of Monopoly and a little bit of why I like it. So let's go ahead and bring Monopoly to the table. So, welcome to Monopoly. For some godforsaken reason that you have not played Monopoly or been living under a rock in the tabletop community for your entirety of your life, Monopoly is essentially a property trading game. And essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to purchase property, gain money from people landing on those properties, and bankrupt all your opponents. It's a player elimination game, very surrounded by the fact that, guess what? Make money, make big bucks. Sometimes you have to sell and kind of figure out what you need to buy and what you don't need to buy and all that jazz. So, the way Monopoly works is that everybody gets to select a token. Now, for this example right here, I'm using actually my favorite version of Monopoly, which is the Looney Tunes one that was released all the way back in early 2000. So you're going to be seeing lots of Looney Tunes properties, including these awesome pewter tokens right here. I got the Acme crate. There you go, focus camera. I don't know if it will. I got TNT. There's Bugs Bunny's mailbox. I won't get them all out, but you get the idea. So everyone picks a token. That just represents who they want to be on the player board. And everyone starts at go. And then on each turn, essentially you just take 2 dice, 6-sided dice, chuck them, roll them, move that many spaces, and then essentially resolve whatever space that you land on. Now, there's all sorts of different spaces, basically going from property to your different chance and treasury card locations, so essentially just like a random chance of something happening. You will have your vehicles, which are essentially different versions of property that they weight different. You have your companies, which also do the same thing. And then you have 2 particular locations that are basically you have to pay a certain amount of money to the bank in order to basically survive. You also have these 3 unique spots on the board. So right here, jail, is basically just visiting jail if you land on it specifically. You're just hanging out watching people in jail. Free parking, essentially nothing happens. And then go to jail makes you go to jail, and there's rules associated with being in jail. Now, when you go, when either you land or pass go, you collect $200. So that immediately you just get some extra income in your pocket. So just going around the board right here is going to actually gain you income. Now, that's the thing, though. You can't just gain income from just going and passing go. That's only $200. At the start of the game, everyone starts with $1,500. So however you want to divvy that up, you may choose. The game rules usually tell you exactly how much you should. Usually for me, it's like 2 500s, 2 100s, 6 20s, 2 50s, 5 5s, 5 1s, and then 5 10s. I believe my 10s are being covered right now by one of these stacks. So that's how that works. And with that money, though, you have to figure out how you're going to use that money. Because the major way you're going to be gaining cash in this game is by buying properties and then having your opponents land on them. So, for example, let's say for Pepe Le Pew's Lover's Lane, I'm going to go find the property card. My opponent lands on that. No? There it is. If I own this property, once I purchase it, I get the property card. They will then have to pay rent when my opponents land on it. So by default, it's $4. However, you're going to notice there's a lot of other things going on here. So in particularly with Looney Tunes, they're called sound stages and movie studios. But in actual Monopoly terms, they are basically houses and hotels. And what will happen is that first, if you get two of the same suit of color, in this case, so if I get both of these purple colors on the board, what will happen is that not only will I get to double the rent when people land on it. So right now, it would, if I own both of them, it would go from $4 to $8. I then have the ability on my turn to purchase more houses. And what happens is for each house, it's going to cost a particular value based off the different property. So each one of these houses is going to cost me $50. So when I purchase a house, I put the house on the colored portion right here, representing how many exist on that particular property. Now, when I have one house on there, my income now is going to be $20 when opponents land on that particular property. And you can basically have 4 houses, and then you can replace all the 4 houses with a hotel. And in that case, when I have that one on there, it's the maximum I can get from that particular property, and I get a lot of cashola from it. It's pretty nice. So that's kind of the idea, is to land on properties, to buy them, then set it up so you can actually gain more cash. So that way when your opponents land on them, so let's pretend Bugs Bunny's rabbit hole lands over here, that opponent now goes from having to pay $4 base to $450. But there's a lot of different things that go into play with that. Obviously you have to roll the dice, make sure you land on those particular properties, weigh and choose which particular ones that you want to land on, etc., etc. There's a lot of choice here. And really what's nice about Monopoly is that every time that you land on a particular property that you currently do not own, you do have a choice. So you can either purchase the property or not, and depending on how you like to play, the auction rules come into play. Once you own all particular suit, you can actually choose which one of these in particular that you want to purchase the houses on, and etc. There's lots of different decisions here. So, and how you want to actually build up your particular property lot. So now granted, there is chance here with the dice, but you got ways a little bit around that, which, come through the cards, as well as, if you see that your opponents are really landing on particular spots all the time, you can buy those up, as well as if you see someone getting to a particular color, if you want to stop them, you can buy one. And then part of the game as well is you can actually trade and make deals with your opponents by saying, hey, if you really want this particular property of mine, I'll let you have it for this amount of cash. So there's also that portion of it too. It's kind of loose in that terms, which is why you probably hear a lot of folks talk about house rules with Monopoly. But that's kind of the general gist of Monopoly right here. So essentially move around, gain cash, and the last thing to keep in mind is that the goal is to bankrupt your opponents. And what will eventually happen is that your opponent will land on a particular property and not have the money. So let's say this Bugs Bunny person had, Daffy Duck's treasure trove. That was one of the properties they own. Now, what you can do is you can mortgage the property, which what happens is that when a property's mortgaged, you basically gain that much cash to put in your pocket. Now, the thing is that this property is no longer active. So if I were to land on the treasure trove over here, I don't have to pay anything based off whatever, even if there's houses on there. So that's kind of one of the tricks, is that you need to make sure that if you can mortgage something, gain that cash so you can pay up. And then if you get money back, you can actually pay the mortgage value to flip your property back alive, so that way it's all alive and kicking. But there's a lot of weight and balance here. And as you go around the board, each one of these lanes right here actually becomes more expensive. So if you'll actually notice from the purple one right here, each one of the houses cost $50, while this lane over here, each of the houses cost $200, which is pretty expensive. But you'll notice that the difference between rent as well as the ones with the different houses on them become a lot more valuable. Literally, by just having 2 houses on the blue, it's $500. So that's a lot of money that you have to dump in there. And as the game moves on, things ramp up. And as soon as your opponent doesn't have enough money, even after mortgaging everything, to pay for whatever they have to give due, game ends. They are eliminated, and the game will end once all players have been eliminated. So there you go. General gist of Monopoly, if you never, for some reason, have never played it before, that's just kind of the general gist. Now let's actually talk about why I really dig this game. So one of the things I do need to say up front is that Monopoly was the very first tabletop game I ever played. The actual rendition of Monopoly I played was the Simpsons version from the early 2000s. And I still own that one. It's actually not in the greatest of shape. So that's why we're actually showing off the Looney Tunes one here today, because it's actually my favorite rendition of the collectible Monopolies. And Monopoly was really one of the first games I played and actually took seriously and actually learned a lot about. You know, especially when you're growing up, like Monopoly teaches you a lot about math, teaches you how to do different things. You know, I think a lot of people who play Monopoly nowadays forget that this particular pay up one right here actually allows you to pay 10% of your current, how much income you currently have in the pocket. So, for example, it says you could pay $200, but as my dad always taught me, why would you need to pay $200 when if you only have $100, you could pay $10. So little things like that, which as an adult sounds stupid, but as a kid, that's a big deal. It's pretty important to actually learn kind of how all this math plays out and how to add up your money and all that stuff. And it's actually a really good game to teach, people first learning math. I think it's great. I think it's a really good job of doing that. Now, on top of that, too, I think what makes Monopoly great is the fact that it's a really good ramping game. Now, what I mean by that is that a lot of games usually, they ramp up, but not in the same speed and actually part of the game's build, per se. If you actually look at a lot of trading card games, kind of what a lot of them do is that you're playing cards out to essentially kind of build up your game so that way you can play out these big cards. And then those cards are kind of the end all be all. The thing with those types of games, though, is that those games are rather quick, and usually sometimes you can just get slaughtered immediately, even without doing the engine. And sometimes a lot of those card games become, all right, the one-trick pony card that allows you to do this crazy combo thing that's not really expensive. There's a lot of trading card games that have, de-evolved from that kind of ramp-up style. Here in Monopoly, this is the base of all ramp games. Essentially, go buy properties, buy a suit of properties, put houses on those properties, then put hotels on them, and make it so corners or particular lots of spaces on the board, guess what? They're going to be incredibly valuable, and when an opponent lands on one of those, you're making bank. When you see a lane that's got nothing but hotels on them, you are scared. You are immediately scared, and you don't want to touch that. So there's that factor in it. Now, Monopoly does have some luck, and the luck does come down to essentially dice. There are no ways to actually truly manipulate the dice. There is one particular card in the chance deck that allows you to essentially move a player back 3 spaces, as well as there are cards that actually allow you to advance to particular locations, and sometimes that can be good, sometimes that can be bad. I'm trying to find it because I know it's here. Hold on. There you go. So in every Monopoly game, there's a chance card that allows you to basically go back 3 spaces, but there's other ones that actually allow you to move to different locations. So go directly to jail, or you can go to Bugs Bunny's rabbit hole, which is the most expensive one. You can go to Tweety's bird cage, which is all the way over here. It's a very common thing within all the core Monopolies that there's one that goes here, there's one that goes here, and there's one that goes here, as well as going to this particular vehicle right here. So there's other ways to kind of get there by just landing on chance. And once you actually learn to memorize these chance decks and the treasure decks, you actually start to kind of build a little bit of strategy on what's to come up, because these can actually benefit you or harm you at the same time. Now, they are called chance and treasury. They are just a stack of cards that allow you to do things. But sometimes that could be incredibly helpful, and if you know these decks really well, you can actually take a chance on them and see if when you land on them, you're like, okay, this can actually be good or be really bad for me. It's all kind of up to that on the chance front. And even with that chance, though, buying property and having this big, thick stack of cards of whatever type, I'm picking this one up because actually the light blues over here are my absolute favorites usually to buy. And not because of Looney Tunes. This is in any Monopoly specifically. Having that big, thick stack of cards, knowing that, guess what? This particular thing's laced up. You go over here, start purchasing things, and then you can start seeing the properties to start to build up. And then you start to put some pressure on your opponent, because when they're going around there, your opponent then has to make decisions. Are they going to try to buy property over here, knowing that they might have to spend money if they land on one of these properties? Do they want to purchase that house to put on one of these? There is some strategy there that I really dig. Now, on top of that, too, Monopoly, by default, actually does play up to 6 players, which I never recommend that you actually do. I don't know why. one of the biggest issues that when I talk to people about my love of Monopoly is the fact that it takes forever to play. And I think one of the reasons why I enjoy this so much, and this is more of a personal thing for me specifically, is the fact that when you're playing with people that actually know the strategy of the game of, all right, I'm going for this color, or I'm going for this color, or they know how these decks are set up. They kind of know how things work. They know how the players around the table are. You can easily get a game of Monopoly that's between 2 to 4 players, probably done under 2 hours. If you're playing 2 to 3, I've played tons of games in my life in a 3-player setting where it's done in under an hour, and that's with both players eliminated. No one's just walking away from the table saying they're upset and they don't want to play anymore. If people know what they're doing, Monopoly is incredibly fun to play. It's very strategic. It's absolutely a blast. But if players don't know what they're doing and they're just kind of willy-nilly buying different properties and such, that's when the game slogs down. Especially when you can have a giant diverse group of properties, but if you're not making any money off of them, they're just kind of hanging out and they're not really doing you a whole lot of good. And especially if you're the player that's buying the random property over here to stop your opponent when they already have 2 other ones, then you're definitely going to slow the game down, and then it becomes a giant social game of, all right, how much money do you want for that particular property so I can get it in my hand and start building that suit up? You don't usually want to end up doing that, especially because you're already wasting money, and then eventually what's going to end up happening is if you're just not making any money, you're going to land on stuff, you're going to go to jail, and I didn't talk about jail, but jail is also a giant chance where essentially you just got to roll doubles, in which I did not, and then you have to go pay money, and then that's how you can go get out of jail. So there's a lot of things that go into that. But if players know what's going on, that doesn't happen, at least in my experience. I have played games where I play with people that really know what's up, and we can get games done in under an hour. I have played games where people don't know what the heck that they're doing, and the game's a giant slogfest, and it becomes no fun. Honestly, personally, my favorite games of Monopoly are 2-player games. And generally with me, and comes to tabletop, 2-player games are generally more of my jam specifically. But, yeah. So, that's what I would just recommend you do, is just to make sure that you're playing, in an environment where you have a little bit more of a strategic setting, players know what they're doing and such. Now, it does require you to play the game and kind of start to understand the game. So, that is one thing to keep in mind. But I generally love the ramp. I love buying properties. I love putting them in my hand. I love seeing the look on my opponent's face when they land on that big, thick property. It's got lots of cash that they're going to have to pay for me on and all that stuff. And then the nice thing, too, is guess what? You're learning more, not just about, playing Monopoly. Also life. Do you want to put that money and invest it in putting more houses? Do you want to save it for a rainy day when you decide to land on Bugs Bunny's rabbit hole over here and they got a magical hotel? And guess what happens? You got to pay $2,000? It's the most expensive one in the game. So for those of you who don't play Monopoly very often or have gotten to this point, it's kind of scary. Yeah. I always like it when someone has this card and they have to pay you $2,000. It's fantastic. But there is that nice little risk-reward system that's built in Monopoly too. And for those of you who do know me, I really do enjoy risk-reward style, game mechanics, because that is a lot of what Monopoly is. Do I want to invest in something, knowing that I might get very little off of it, but I also could get really big off of it as well. So you have to kind of weigh and balance that as you're landing on each one of these properties and all that fun stuff. So I really dig that mechanic of it, and especially when you're doing that with players that really know what's going on and what they're doing, it's a ton of fun. I really dig it. But I do agree, for those of you who do not like Monopoly, if you have a large group of players that don't necessarily know what's going on and people are just buying properties up, that's why Monopoly takes 3-4 hours to complete, if it's even completed at all. It doesn't matter what your player count is. You can even be playing 2 players and games can last forever. But when you got 2 people that really know what's going on, 2, 3 people, 4 people, maybe, depending on what's going on, these games can go really awesome. Under 2 hours, no problem. People aren't getting mad at each other. It's a fun time. I really dig this game a lot for that particular reason. I also would say, too, that obviously I'm using a collector's edition based off an IP. I also have my SpongeBob one out in my living room as well that I really enjoy. Using Monopolies, too, that are actually using the whole property mechanic also kind of helps with the flavor of the game as well. One of the things I tell people when you're buying a Monopoly, a lot of Monopolies are they're trying to capitalize off an IP, and usually they're selling like a property is like a character. For example, I actually own two different Monopolies. One of them is a Marvel My Heroes one where you actually can put the characters on the particular property, as well as I actually own a Skylanders one I got at San Diego Comic-Con. And those two in particular, while it's cool to have your Marvel Heroes and cool Skylanders on the table, they're not properties. You aren't buying stuff from those worlds. Here with this Looney Tunes one, sure, you can immediately associate the fact that, oh, that's Pepe Le Pew, that's Lola Bunny, that is Wile E. Coyote, whoever. But these are actually properties, like I said. Bugs Bunny's Rabbit Hole, Foghorn Leghorn's Farm, stuff like that. Even the fact that the vehicles are still vehicles. That's another big thing, too, where these have always been different railroads within the core Monopoly. They're mainly vehicles treated within all the different IP ones. And this is what's done really well, too. The same thing with the actual companies as well. Now, granted, it's not the waterworks and the electric company. We do have a hair salon and the obedience school, which I absolutely love. It says, dog, I say dog. I love that one. But I absolutely adore how the whole property mechanic, and honestly, the monopolies that actually go in on that property idea are the best ones, because that's when you actually are really taking up the theme of, hey, I'm actually investing in property. I'm upgrading the property by buying something. Now, granted, with here, it's movie studios and sound stages. So it all makes sense with the Looney Tunes theme that works with these particular characters. But yeah, it just makes the themes work a whole lot better when you're actually playing Monopoly games that have the property stuff on them. And I think Looney Tunes does it the best where, like I said, character-based, obviously, but it's still a property. You can see a little bit of the property there in the background, and the way that they actually treat the different, hotels/houses on the cards, I think is also really well done, too. So that was a lot to say about Monopoly right there. But I really do dig Monopoly. I really love the risk-reward system. I love getting cash. I love ramping things up. I like playing with people that actually really know the game. Now, one thing I will say, and this is a very hot debate with terms of all Monopoly players and people who play this game religiously and all that stuff. People have many different house rules that they like to play with. Free parking, put cash on it, stuff like that. Some people don't play with the rule where after you roll doubles 3 times, you go to jail. I've heard people do that before. To me, the only thing that I don't do specifically, if you actually read the rules, is that there is an auction system where essentially when you land on a property, you basically, if you don't purchase it, you have to auction the property off. And the property auction can start at whatever bid. I don't play by that rule because essentially the rules don't actually make it super clear if no one wants the property, put the money in, what happens. So the way I always kind of played growing up was the fact that these properties, if you don't want it, you don't buy it. Now, auctioning definitely does work more in a multiplayer setting, especially if you're going on beyond 4 players, based off my experience actually performing that, because it forces the board to actually start to get bought up a little bit, and that way players actually have things to go do, because obviously, like any game, you want some way to end the game, and if people aren't buying property, game's not going to end. So, me personally, I don't like playing with the auction rule in a game that's 4 or less players, but anything beyond that, definitely put out the auction rule, because it's going to help make sure things get bought up. But however you like to play Monopoly, play it as you will. I do have to say one thing. The free parking thing is atrocious. Don't do that. It makes the game incredibly unbalanced. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, essentially every time that you have to give them the bank money, you basically put it in like a stockpile of cash. And whenever someone lands on free parking, they get all that cash. And as the game kind of builds up, if someone just randomly gets like $1,200 out of nowhere because it's all the cash in the middle of the bank, it makes the game incredibly unbalanced in my experience. I don't really like playing that way. If you do, nothing wrong with that. But if you want a more balanced Monopoly experience where someone's not going to be chucking, cards at your face and getting eyesores because it goes right in your eye socket. I apologize for the great description right there. Don't play with free parking rules. But anyway, I adore this game. I wish I had played it more often. Obviously, Monopoly has been evolved over the years with different types of mechanics and stuff like that, but I still generally core the basis of Monopoly a lot. I don't play it as much as I used to, obviously, because I've been playing a ton of other stuff, and Monopoly is a rather longer game, but every time it comes to the table, I never have a bad time with Monopoly. So, there you go. My quick love of Monopoly in a nutshell. So there you have it, folks. That is essentially my description of why I love Monopoly and all that stuff. Really, at its core, Monopoly is a risk reward type of system in which you basically have to learn how to invest your money and figure out where you want to put that. Do you want to save it for a rainy day, just in case you have to go pay someone a lot of money? Or do you want to make it so you could actually get a lot of money in the process? There's a lot of different factors that go into how Monopoly works and plays. And obviously, there is a lot of different factors that increase the type of luck that go into that particular game. But Monopoly is first of its kind. It was definitely a game that brought a lot of people together that, at the time where it came out, money was a big deal. And actually investing money into different property is a glorious concept. And obviously, games have definitely improved on those types of mechanics over the years. Settlers of Catan, which I don't know if I'll ever talk about on this channel. Story for another day. Settlers of Catan definitely evolved that mechanic. Machi Koro's also evolved that mechanic as well and made it a lot more streamlined where you're basically getting money, investing it into different things, and then possibly gaining something off of that. And a lot quicker, a lot lighter of a fashion where there's a lot less, brain busting things that you have to think about while you're playing the game. Especially, it also helps fit with, more players in your play group as well. But we all have to admit, if you play Monopoly and you've played it well, it's a great game. It's an absolutely fantastic game that cannot go undismissed for what it is. It's fantastic. I still love it. I wish I could play it more this day. Honestly, me bringing it out to make this video is actually making me want to go play Monopoly over the holidays. So I'm probably going to go do that. I especially know my brother's been bugging me to do that too, because my brother's also a big fan of Monopoly. But, all I would like to say is if you don't actually own Monopoly, I own 15 because I love Monopoly that much. I just collect Monopolies over the years. Monopolies used to be super expensive when I used to do that. Now they're a lot cheaper. You can actually get into Monopoly, I think, at around $30 when it used to be like 40 or 50. I think some of them even go for 20. If they've also streamlined a lot of things in those games to make it a lot more approachable of an experience, give it a shot. Monopoly's everywhere. You can get it on your freaking phone. You can play it anywhere. Give it a shot. It's great. I adore it. I love Monopoly. It's colorful. It's bright. If you get one of the collector's editions, you get some fun characters on it too with some cool little tokens. I like bringing out the Looney Tunes one because there's like the anvil too that I like. I always remember is my favorite one to use as my little token to move around the board and stuff. So, but yeah, I really like Monopoly. It's great. Now, I have one thing to say though. When are we getting Crash Bandicoot Monopoly? I'm looking at you. USAopoly. When are we getting it? I want it. Talk to Activision. I will pay lots of money for it. And then I'll probably complain about it. But until then, everybody, I hope this actually was a great insight, a little bit of why I love this game, kind of my introduction to tabletop and all that fun stuff. I hope you enjoyed this video. And until then, we'll see you next time for when I bring a new game to your folks' table. Take care, everybody.